Lines with our Kwon and Noaram. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Sunny.
So let's begin on the domestic front. I understand cases from abroad are a cause of much concern here.
Yes, as you said, a surge in imported infections is the reason for our daily caseload having jumped to the 40s today. 30 new imported COVID-19 cases have been reported this Tuesday, which is more than double the number of local transmissions today. 26 patients have been detected through special airport screenings, while 3 were reported in Gyeonggi-do province and 1 case in Chungcheongbuk-do province. 16 cases were linked to a Russia-flagged ship, which Arirang will go into detail later. It's the first time in 36 days that imported cases outnumbered domestic transmissions. But local cases also remain a concern as sporadic cluster infections continue to affect the nation, with 11 in the Seoul metropolitan area, 4 in Daejeon, and 1 case added in the southern part of the nation on Tuesday.
Right, so let's take a closer look at the numbers then.
Sure, we have 29 more cases compared to Monday. Let's take a closer look at the figures. That is 46 new cases that we're having today, bringing the total of confirmed cases in the nation to 12,484. And 1 person was confirmed to have died from the disease in the span of a day, bringing the death toll to 281. A total of 1,295 people are still in quarantine, as 18 more people are now quarantined and 10,908 people have completely recovered from the virus. And if we take a look at the developments over the past week, today's figure seems to be pretty much the average in the span of a week, because we've had 30s, 50s, and even 60s. And yesterday we went down to 17 cases, but again, we are up to the 40s.
Right, so what are the updates on the global front then?
Well, the numbers are still accelerating, also as the World Health Organization said, after the global tally surpassed 9 million. Let's take a look at our graph here. We have now more than 9.18 million total cases, while over 4.9 people have now recovered. And the death toll as of 12 p.m. Korea time stood at 474,339. And let's take a look at the 12 countries with the biggest number of infections. The U.S. has over 2.3, almost 2.4 million cases, with a death toll at over 122,000. And Brazil, way more than 1 million cases now, with over 51,000 deaths, followed by Russia, which has a pretty low fatality number at 8,206, but almost 600,000 total cases, followed by India, the UK, and Spain. Moving over to Peru, that's now having a total caseload of over 257,000 cases, with more than 8,000 fatalities. And Chile and Italy pretty similar when it comes to the total cases, followed by Iran and Germany, as well as Turkey. And although not on the list, Mexico and Pakistan have also more than 180,000 cases now.
Now, so as you mentioned, the U.S. has almost 2.4 million cases, and it accounts for around 20% of the global tally.
Yes, the spread is not slowing down in all parts of the U.S. In fact, it's speeding up in many parts of, in many states, that is. And in fact, 10 states actually had the highest numbers recently, and mainly those are concentrated in the South, West, and Midwest. Given that the U.S. accounts for some 4% of the world's population, the fact that it takes up 20% of the world's total COVID-19 cases, that is very alarming. The situation in the U.S. is being compared to a forest fire by health experts, and top disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci stressed it's not even time to talk about a second wave. And with 20,000 plus infections occurring every day, the country first needs to get out of the first wave.
Meanwhile, amid the pandemic, Saudi Arabia has decided to limit worshippers' attendance at an annual pilgrimage to Mecca that starts in late July.
That's right. The country announced that this important event for Muslims around the world will be held in a very limited scale this year. According to Saudi Arabia's ministry in charge of Hajj, the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, the event will be held with a limited number of people and arrivals from overseas will be banned. So Saudi citizens and foreigners already residing in the country will be allowed to take part while abiding by enforced social distancing measures. An exact number, however, has yet to be announced. The pilgrimage to Mecca is regarded as the largest human gathering in the world, with almost 2.5 million people having participated last year. Muslims try to attend at least once in their lives. The Hajj ministry says the move is in line with the teachings of Islam in preserving the lives of human beings.
All right, so thank you for that. Stay with us for more on the domestic updates after the regular briefing.
We'll do so.
Aram, now because of the steady rise in cases here in the country, the government is poised to release stricter and more detailed distancing measures.
That's right. I mean, there have been many names for these distancing rules like everyday life quarantine and etc., but there is no real clear picture of what that actually means. So the government, to address this problem, will soon announce a detailed social distancing guideline to avoid confusion. Many people have been confused as to the exact criteria for certain social distancing and virus prevention measures, when to use it and how to use it. And the government is said to be looking at introducing 3 stages of distancing and will announce these detailed measures for each stage soon. Now, these 3 stages will be according to the severity of infections. We are now at the everyday life quarantine stage, but because of the recent rebound, we could see some stricter measures being enforced sometime soon.
Right, and despite the rebound in cases, the WHO, I hear, had some encouraging words to say about Korea's handling of the relapse.
That's right. The WHO's top emergencies expert, Mike Ryan, noted that Korea has seen a jump in cases recently, but he said that overall case numbers were very stable or actually dropping, and praised Seoul's approach to the rebound. Here he was speaking at a briefing on Monday.
Hello, everyone. It is a challenge for all countries, and I think South Korea, with other countries, demonstrate that even when you get down to very low incidence, you still have to have a very strong public health surveillance system, and you still have to have a very capable public health infrastructure. You still have to have a population that is willing to take the necessary actions.
Right, and he also added that Korea had the means to find patients and track their routes in order to stem any further spread. And he went on to say that Korean health authorities are working tirelessly to stay one step ahead of the virus as well.
Right, a Russian ship, meanwhile, in Busan is also causing much concern.
Yes, I saw alluded to it earlier, but health authorities are on high alert. There are 16 cases reported from this ship that entered a Busan port over the weekend. Now, the vessel, which departed from Russia's Vladivostok, carried 21 sailors, so 16 out of the 21 sailors tested positive, and around 160 people who came into contact with the infected are currently in isolation. So there is some concern of any possible further spread of the virus, and the 16 patients, meanwhile, are also being quarantined inside the ship. The other crew members tested negative, but officials will carry out further tests just to be safe, and they too are being isolated. And this comes as Korea is already on high alert over the, as Soa mentioned, the increasing number of imported cases in Korea.
Right, Aram, thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Right, it's a little after 2 in the afternoon here in Seoul, and as always, we now await the regular afternoon briefing on COVID-19. Health authorities believe Korea has already been hit by a second wave, with Seoul as the epicenter. They claim if the term second wave means an explosion of new cases that severely strains the healthcare system, then a second wave is indeed in progress here in the metropolitan region. Accordingly, officials are calling for physical distancing and stringent hygiene practices, claiming that the goal is to maintain the pace and scope of the second spread within manageable capacity until a cure or vaccine is found. Statistics show almost half of the new patients last week are in their 50s or older. What's more, the number of critically ill patients has risen from 8 in early June to 34 this past weekend. Again, in light of this finding, health officials are calling on people to refrain from attending gatherings and from venturing into crowded and confined indoor places that are likely to expose them to the risk of infection. Meanwhile, face masks are strongly recommended at indoor venues, but when outdoors, especially in the heat, officials claim taking off your mask for a little while maintaining a healthy distance from those around you may be safe. We are still waiting for the briefing to start, and perhaps now we could take a look at the right. We just hear that the briefing will start in a few seconds. We have Kwon Jun-wook, the vice head of the KCDC, prepared to give this Tuesday's briefing on the latest situation surrounding the COVID-19 here in Korea. We'll come back to you after this briefing with Kwon So-ah.
First, here is Deputy Director Kwon Jun-wook with the briefing. Let us now begin our regular briefing for COVID-19 response for June 23rd, Tuesday. We have 16 local new infections and 30 new imported cases, a total of 46 new cases as of today. The total number of confirmed cases now stands at 12,484. And 27 more people have been discharged following full recovery, and a total of 1,295 people are in quarantine undergoing treatment. We had one more fatality. The death toll now stands at 281. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved family. We have 16 local infections, and let us brief you on the details. Regarding the Ridgeway in Gwanak-gu District, Seoul, we have 4 additional cases, and a total of 202 cases have been confirmed to date. At Dobong-gu District Sangsim Daycare Center, we also have 2 additional cases being confirmed, and a total of 45 people have been confirmed to date. Next, in Daejeon City in Seogu District, we have a door-to-door sales facility. We have 8 new cases, and a total of 57 people have been confirmed to date. Us at the KCDC, we are currently witnessing increase of the cluster infections surrounding venues of the academies, logistics centers, and door-to-door facilities. And we are also looking at some of the model cases with little damages and a small number of confirmed cases. And first, they also wore face masks, and they kept strictly to the quarantine measures. And together with these quarantine measures, they made efforts to enhance the working conditions, including having the dividers between the people, and also when they also limited the movement within the offices and the business establishments, the damages done on the facilities were actually very minimal. Next, we have imported cases amounting to 30 today, and as of these countries, 17 were from Europe, 16 were from Russia, and 1 from Germany, 2 from Africa, and also 11 from Asia aside from Japan, 7 aside from China, 7 were from Kazakhstan. And the KCDC, we continue to also witness the 16 confirmed cases as for the Russian sailors who arrived at the Busan port. And also we are looking into this case, Ice Stream. Also, this is a vessel from Russia. And we are also doing the epidemiological investigations. And until now, we have 3 suspicious cases. And therefore, we are conducting our epidemiological investigation and diagnostic testings for 21 people, and as of now, 16 people have been confirmed to date. Right now, we are looking at the dates of the entry on the June 21st, and we are also looking at all of the contacts, including the maintenance facility and the unloaders, and as well as interpreters. And there are also 61 people who have been engaging in the unloading process, and a total of 176 people have been categorized as contacts. And we are testing every one of them. And also these include also another vessel, Ice Crystal, which has also embarked in the similar area, and this include 21 sailors as well as 61 other unloaders. So these numbers are included in this total. We are conducting the diagnostic testings, and we will bring you updates as soon as possible. And next, with the increase of the confirmed cases, here are some updates on our use of the medical resources going forward. Firstly, it is very important to have secured number of hospital beds, and as of now, we do not have a shortage as of now, and we are also allocating the medical resources according to the severity of their level, and currently we have 546 hospital beds available nationwide, and as of now, we have also confirmed that of them, 171 beds are available for admissions. And also we have infectious disease designated hospitals, which have about 3,000 hospital beds, and of them about 2,000 are available for admissions of patients. And currently we have 4 live treatment centers, and going forward we will add 1 more to the metropolitan area and also 1 more in the Chungcheong area as well. And in preparing for ourselves for a widespread cluster infection, we also have a scheme to share the hospital beds among regions, and we also have plans to move the patients from region to region. Next are some of the updates on our R&D on the COVID-19 vaccine and cure. And tomorrow we also have another government expert meeting, and we will deal with many issues, including the use of these medical resources as well. And up until now, 185 people who have recovered from COVID-19 have showed their intentions to donate their plasma samples for the treatment. And we thank you for your donation. And the people who can donate are people who are aged between 18 and 65 who have fully recovered from COVID-19. And also we ask you to continue to donate your blood going forward. And aside from the plasma donation, currently we have the 5 hospitals that are carrying out the plasma donations of blood, and about 1,700 of our patients have benefited from such a system. And we are continuing to witness cluster infections ranging in venues like the door-to-door sales business establishments as well as logistics centers. And we have therefore designated door-to-door businesses, logistics centers, large-scale academies, and buffets as high-risk facilities. So there are 4 new high-risk facilities which are included in the current 8 high-risk facilities. And starting from 6 p.m. today, you have to comply with quarantine measures if you are working at these 4 high-risk facilities. If you breach these infection prevention protocols, you may be resulting in a fine or a ban on gathering as well. Last but not least, today, the temperature would peak at 35 degrees Celsius, and therefore we are very much concerned of any diseases that are related to heat waves. And we believe that the patients prone to heat waves as well as the COVID-19 high risk are the same people, and therefore senior citizens over the age of 65 or people with chronic illnesses are also also very weak against heat waves, so we ask you to refrain from going outdoors at the hottest hours. And last but not least, globally, we are currently continuing to witness COVID-19 outbreak. And currently, recently we saw a slowdown. However, it's also spiking up again. And yesterday, WHO has also said that the daily number of confirmed cases peaked with about 180,000 people a day. And globally, we are also putting efforts like testing and tracing and treating, and therefore many countries are trying to overcome the COVID-19 outbreak. However, there are still many countries that are witnessing a rebound in the number of COVID-19 confirmed cases as they ease their lockdown and ease their distancing measures. And as for South Korea, we believe that the current moment is very important for us to determine whether we can curb the virus fully, or we could be the latter case where, just like other countries, we have a rebound in a large number of cases. So we believe that this is a very critical moment in time, and a lot of our public have successfully carried out distancing and abided by the quarantine measures, and therefore we have successfully participated in decreasing the cluster infections in the metropolitan area. The quarantine authorities will continue to trace and treat people. Also, we are trying to identify the traces of contacts, and also we are exerting our full efforts to minimize the number of contacts. And thanks to the support of the public and the quarantine and the cooperation with the quarantine authorities as well as the central government, we are currently minimizing the fatality rate, especially for those in the high-risk group. And during the past few days, we saw a decline of the number of local infections. However, with just a few days of such a trend is not sufficient enough, and this could also lead to another complacency in our daily lives. So we need to look at least 14 days, and we need to also exert our full efforts to maintain the decreased number for the next 2 weeks, and we continue to ask for your perseverance going forward. If we become complacent, we believe that the COVID-19 can reoccur at any time, and if the number resurges, we believe that they could attack and they could bring about the sacrifices of those people in the high-risk group. And we believe that the COVID-19 would spread even faster because of the conditions in fall, and we believe that right now is a moment for us to curb the further spread of the COVID-19 to its large extent. We need to carry out our distancing measures and make it a habit to use and to stick to the quarantine measures as well. And we also need to carry out, as the quarantine authorities, we will continue to cooperate with the local municipalities and the public health centers so that we can deal with the prolonged outbreak going forward. Thank you very much.
Right, so that was Kwon Jin-wook, the Vice Head of KCDC, with Tuesday's regular briefing. Please start with Kwon's words on imported cases then.
Sure. Well, as we mentioned before, we have 30 new imported cases, and 17 are from Europe and even from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, so from various countries around the world. But 16 are linked to a Russia-flagged ship, and it looks like 3 people had symptoms on that ship that docked in Busan 2 days ago, and 21 people on that ship have been tested. 16 were confirmed with the virus, but still there are more than 100 contacts related to this case, so those are all being tested. And one more important thing is that 4 new high-risk facilities have been designated as high-risk facilities. That will start on 6 p.m. this Tuesday here in the country. That includes large-scale cram schools with more than 300 people, as well as buffets. So you might want to check that on the KCDC's homepage later on.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
We turn our attention now to neighboring Japan, where officials are working to restore some semblance of life prior to the pandemic. Tokyo has launched a full-fledged reopening of businesses, and restrictions on domestic travel in Japan are poised to be lifted. For more on the efforts there, I have Yonemura Koichi from Mainichi Shimbun live on the line. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Efforts to establish a new normal in Japan come amid continued cases of COVID-19. What is the situation in Japan like with regard to the pandemic?
General view in Japan on the situation of COVID-19 is epidemic is currently under control, although 40 to 50 new cases are reported every day. And because of the rate of death and serious illness are low compared to Europe and North and South America, and we have some more room for new patients in Japanese hospitals. And in addition to that, recent large-scale antibody tests shows that estimated infection rates in Japan were lower than 0.5%. So that's a kind of a good sign in Japan. But of course, both government and people in Japan are cautious about the another wave to come. So when I get on the subway, almost 100% of people, passengers, are wearing masks.
Well, that is good to know. Now, there are claims that the easing of quarantine measures in Japan is aimed at easing public discontent over the Abe administration's initial response to COVID-19. What are your thoughts on this?
Basically, well, I think the Japanese Abe administration's failure was more on communication strategy other than countermeasures on COVID-19. The core measures such as contact tracing and for clusters and calls to avoid 3C, closed spaces and crowded places and close contact setting. That's 3C, which Japanese government starts emphasizing since mid-March. It worked okay, but when the lack of PP preparation and PCR tests became obvious to public, the Abe administration totally failed to relieve the concern of the public. So that was more a bigger problem in Japan at that time.
I see. On a slightly different note then, what is the reaction in Japan with regard to rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
Of course, there is a strong concern about the current developments in North Korea, especially such as destroying liaison office in Kaesong, and also about continued provocative behavior in the future. However, many experts in Japan thinks that the reason of North Korea's behavior mainly lies on their internal affair, such as tightening domestic atmosphere at the times of economic difficulty, or the strengthening role of the Chairman Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong.
One final question. How do you expect the Abe administration to respond to North Korea's belligerence, so to speak?
As you know, the relationship between Japan and ROK were very bad since last year. But if North Korea strengthens this kind of provocative stance in the future, including missile tests, then necessity to strengthen the cooperation between Japan and ROK and US-Japan ROK will rise. And I think Japanese government well aware of that.
All right, Yonemura Koichi from Mainichi Shimbun, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us live from Tokyo.
Thank you.
On June 16th, the Inter-Korean Joint Liaison Office was destroyed by North Korea, disappearing in a cloud of dust.
쓰레기들과 이를 묵인한 자들의 죄값을 깨끗이 받아내야 한다는 격노한 민심에 부응하여 북남 공동연락사무소를 완전 파괴시키는 조치를 실행했습니다.
북측이 상황을 계속 악화시키는 조치를 취할 경우 우리는 그에 강력히 대응할 것임을 엄중히 경고함.
tensions have been mounting over the flying of leaflets into North Korea by defector groups based in South Korea. Following the destruction of the Joint Liaison Office, North Korea vowed to send millions of propaganda leaflets of its own across the inter-Korean border. With the second North Korea-US summit in Hanoi having ended without a deal, and the COVID-19 pandemic in the US worsening by the day, talks between Pyongyang and Washington have reached an impasse, with North Korea issues now seemingly on the back burner for the Trump administration. North Korea's latest provocations came amid the backdrop of an ailing economy already reeling under heavy sanctions pressure and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The memoirs published by President Trump's former national security advisor John Bolton has also stirred controversy in regards to North Korea. They detail many events that unfolded behind the scenes during Trump's summit with North Korea and others, which observers fear could deepen the sense of mistrust between the US and North Korea.
The Federalists talked about the numerous serious factual flaws which have been underlined as being false by Pompeo, Lighthizer, and others who have all come out and said that this book is full of mistruths about themselves and about others in this administration, and certainly about the president.
Meanwhile, President Moon Jae-in has repeatedly extended an olive branch, calling on North Korea to engage in dialogue since the beginning of this year.
남과 북이 머리를 맞대고 진지하게 함께 논의할 것을 제안합니다.
However, many inter-Korean projects have ground to a halt due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic.
북한도 소통을 단절하고 긴장을 조성하며 과거의 대결 시대로 되돌리려 해서는 안 됩니다.
What's next for inter-Korean ties amid rising tensions as well as uncertainties over the COVID-19 pandemic?
Efforts to contain COVID-19 here on the peninsula are being further challenged by security concerns, as North Korea, that is, takes on a belligerent stance on cross-border affairs. Now, amid these circumstances, we take a look at South Korea's diplomatic and security endeavors with Dr. Ko Myung-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Good to see you again, Dr. Ko.
Thanks for having me.
And visiting Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University.
Hey,
welcome back, Professor.
Thank you.
Dr. Go, North Korea has threatened to send some 12 million propaganda leaflets, and it's reinstalling propaganda loudspeakers on its borders. How do you expect the government here to respond?
So first of all, we have to consider that the North Korea's latest actions are essentially irritating, but it's not really worsening the situation given the fact that it doesn't involve military action on the part of North Korea. Even having said that, I think the South Korean government wouldn't want to escalate the situation or inflame the situation further by responding to this in an equal manner. But I think the biggest concern, though, on the South Korean side is the fact that the North Korea is planning to have a Central Military Committee meeting anytime soon, which could lead to some sort of a decision on the part of North Korea to execute a military action against South Korea, which could potentially lead to damages and even casualties. And I think that's the biggest concern on the South Korean government. And for that reason, I think the South Korean government is preparing itself for that kind of contingency right now.
Right. Professor An, following Pyongyang's detonation of the cross-border liaison office in its town of Kaesong, Lee Do-hun, the special representative for Korean Peninsula Security and Peace Affairs, went to the US to meet with Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun. What do you suppose was on the agenda of their talks?
Yeah, although he did not make any specific comments on the details of the discussions, right? He made two confirmations. First, he confirmed that he met with his counterpart, Steve Biegun, in Washington D.C. That's the kind of point, because there was unplanned, visits, so they had to, have some meeting. Both parties had some reason to meet, and also he commented that they were in discussion on the issues, but he didn't make any specific comment. He confirmed that. I think that at this point that we can speculate that they have evaluated current situation and have discussed the joint action plan, how to cope with the further provocation made by North Korea in the future.
And amid such provocation that our professor just mentioned, to get some perspective on Washington's possible stance on the matter, that is the rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula, we connect with Rory Daniels, the Deputy Project Director of the Forum on Asia-Pacific Security at the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, live on the line. Thank you for being with us at this hour in New York.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Trump administration is yet to respond to the rising tensions on the peninsula. What perhaps is the reason behind its silence?
Well, I think the simplest explanation would be that the Trump administration, like all governments around the world, are very busy managing the public health and economic crisis that is accompanying this global pandemic. But I think also the U.S. policy community, particularly the community that watches North Korea, has observed over many decades that the North Koreans cycle between periods of international engagement and negotiation and periods of retrenchment and provocation. And so if you look to the U.S. response to the North Korean missile launches all the way back to September 2019, it was relatively muted. And I think the strategy right now, as others have said on this panel before me, is to preserve some space for diplomacy and to make sure that the gains and momentum from the negotiations that were had in 2018 can be preserved if and when North Korea wants to come back to the table.
Meanwhile, accounts by former U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton of talks between the leaders of the U.S. and the two Koreas in his upcoming memoir are looking to cause many ripple effects. Do you see the revelations within his book as affecting the situation on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I think that the situation on the Korean Peninsula has for some time been characterized by mutual mistrust, mistrust between the U.S. and the DPRK, mistrust between North and South Korea, mistrust between the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Russia. And it would be really unfortunate if this book contributed to more mutual mistrust and to more misperceptions. But it is only one part of the story of geopolitics on the Korean Peninsula. And I think that what will be much more consequential are the larger factors, which include the US-ROK alliance, our country's respective relationships with China, the interests of other members of the six-party talks, including Russia and Japan, and how we manage our way through this global pandemic crisis. So I think that all of those factors are just much, much, much more consequential than Ambassador Bolton's book. And in the long term, it is all of those other things that we can work on and change that will affect the future of the Korean Peninsula.
Right. How do you foresee the Trump administration dealing with issues related to North Korea, given the upcoming presidential election in the U.S., amid what is the world's worst outbreak of COVID-19, that is?
Yeah, so I think the Trump administration is going to be focused on winning the 2020 election in the United States. And that probably means that there's very little space to try to put together a big deal with North Korea on their nuclear program and on international sanctions. However, I don't think that this period needs to be not used at all by the U.S. and the DPRK to address some of that mutual mistrust and to address the gaps in perception over what happened at the Hanoi summit. So it would be very productive at this time if North Korean diplomats and U.S. diplomats could be holding quiet working level negotiations in the run-up to the election to set up for a time when the U.S. political situation is well known, and we can come back to the table and really get to the bottom of our problems with seriousness.
All right, Ms. Daniels, again, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Right, Dr. Go, there are some who believe that North Korea's recent acts of aggression are driven in part by the global pandemic. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think COVID-19 is probably one of the many factors that is driving North Korean policy process right now, but not the most important factor. The reason is because clearly North Korea is suffering from the impact of, the economic impact of COVID-19, but it's actually what COVID-19 is doing right now is exacerbating the cumulative impact of the sanctions that are currently in place against the country. And in a way, we could say that all the import restriction measures, as well as the stopping of travel between China and North Korea, all these are essentially the straw that broke the camel's back. But not per se, though. I mean, by itself, COVID-19 wasn't a sufficient factor to drive North Korean economy to the ground. So having said that, though, I think North Korea is definitely trying to convince the United States to lift the sanctions that are currently in place against the country. But that's been a long-term goal of the North Korean strategy dealing with the United States. So in a way, we could say that the COVID-19, and in summary, we could say that COVID-19 was an important factor, but what COVID-19 did was to add urgency to North Korean strategy rather than really driving North Korea's strategy, because North Korea's strategy for this year is about making sure that they reach an agreement with President Trump before the uncertainty of the re-election dominates the field. Before that happens, I think North Korea would like to achieve some sort of a agreement with, regarding North Korea's denuclearization roadmap, which favors North Korea, obviously. And I think all their attention is focused on that goal right now.
Right. Apart from the economic impact of the pandemic, Professor An, what impact has the pandemic had on diplomatic affairs, do you think?
Well, answer to the question is that it depends how you define like normal function or diplomatic channel. If you define it as the like a face-to-face activity such as state visit, maybe it will have a significant impact on, because it's preventing people getting together. Even you don't even send the people. I mean, most airports closed already. So it's hard to do it that traditional way. But if you look at different way, more like communication perception, more like terms of communication, yes, you can have video conferencing. Very common. It's like school, same thing. We're doing lecturing, the video conferencing is common. So I don't think any problem, technical problem to communicate with each other. But in terms of decision making, high level decision making, maybe a little bit difficult, because sometimes you have to get together, leaders get together, and then get some ceremony and stuff, some kind of stuff. Maybe that's the kind of a lacking point, because of due to COVID-19 pandemic situation.
Right. Given the status quo, Dr. Go, is there any way for South Korea by itself to kind of work to ease tensions on the peninsula then?
That's unlikely. I mean, clearly, United States has the final call and final say on whether to keep the sanctions or lift the sanctions currently in place. So I think that's the reason why North Korea is trying to have direct negotiation with the United States and deal with over the denuclearization issue. So that's the reason why the recent provocation by North Korea against South Korea, it's not about South Korea, it's about the United States. North Korea is trying to execute the provocation strategy for this year, which is composed of different phases. Actually, in the grand picture, we could say there are two phases to North Korean provocation strategy. The first phase is the provocation against South Korea, and with that completed, North Korea would have gained enough momentum in terms of provocations, and they're going to shift their focus from South Korea to the United States. I think we have to wait for North Korea to run its course when it comes to provocations, and that's the only way we can handle North Korea. After that's done, I think North Korea will de-escalate the situation again, and I think that will open the window opportunity for dialogue for Seoul.
I see. Professor An, despite its attempts to raise tensions with Korea, Pyongyang seeks to strengthen its ties with Beijing. Do you suppose Seoul should seek a regional assistance in resolving the current tensions on the peninsula then?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, because if you look at historic perspective, right? China always side with North Korea, right? It's nothing new about China helping, North Korea. Well, if China helping South Korea, may be a big news. But so I guess I think there's not a big news. But from the North Korean perspective, I think their strategy is like try to get international attention. So they bomb the building, something symbolic, right? Milestone of the inter-Korea cooperation. So I guess the problem is that from now, I think there's the deep dilemma to them, because they have to control it. What they want to lead to whatever happens, international community to lift all the international sanction against them, but it's not easy. Plus that they try to get U.S. attention, but however, there's the election coming up. They're too busy with their own domestic political matters. So I guess they have to get balance it. How do they approach this situation?
Dr. Ko, I asked this question to Ms. Rory Daniels earlier on during our Skype interview. What impact does John Bolton's memoir look to have on cross-border affairs?
So I agree with Ms. Daniels' assessment. I think it's not going to have a major impact. I mean, again, we have to understand the book is really about this recounting of what happened in the last 2 years from the fly-on-the-wall kind of prospect point of view by the former National Security Advisor, Bolton. So in that sense, the information that's being disclosed in this memoir, it's actually information that's new to us, new to the audience and the readership outside, but then it's not new to those participants in those events or the action that took place in the last 2 years. And the information, the dialogue between Kim Jong-un and Trump are known to both parties, clearly. So there's nothing revealing in the book that's going to surprise either side. It's surprising to us. So that's going to affect our, for example, in South Korea especially, it's going to affect our view and assessment in terms of a so-called diplomatic breakthrough that took place in the last 2 years. It's going to cast them in a different light and possibly in a less flattering light. So that's the political consequence of the memoir. But when it comes to the direct relations, the bilateral relations between Pyongyang and Washington will have no impact whatsoever.
Right. Professor, and one final question. What are some of the variables to keep an eye on with regard to inter-Korean affairs in the future then?
Well, first thing is like North Korea side, right? Whether now they have a kind of perception, create a perception of a threat, but they will take any military action. I think that's the key factors. For internally in South Korea is what kind of a countermeasure the South Korea will take it and how they implement it. And then internationally for U.S. side is that I think the domestic political issue about the U.S. election, who's going to be elected, or the Donald Trump will be re-elected. Is it better for North Korea or not? That's the things we have to see how it develops. Right.
I see. All right, Professor An, thank you for your insights. And Dr. Ko, as always, thank you for your thoughts.
Thanks for having me.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of Tuesday's coverage of COVID-19. Be sure to join us tomorrow as we further explore the path and prospects of the engines behind Korea's New Deal, which are the Digital New Deal and Green New Deal. In the meantime, do share your thoughts and inquiries with us through our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. Thank you for watching.